It was 2:47 a.m. when Nathan Cole, one of the most powerful software builders on the East Coast, woke up with a jolt. The bedroom was large, silent, perfectly decorated, and completely empty. On the ceiling, the faint reflection of the hallway lights flickered, as if reminding him of everything he'd lost. The man who once raised digital skyscrapers and led teams across the world could barely hold his own gaze anymore. Sitting on the edge of the bed in his Boston mansion, silk robe wrinkled and cold against his skin, Nathan cried in silence, trying to understand the exact moment when wealth had turned into loneliness. On the shelf beside him, an old photo showed him and his wife cutting the ribbon at the opening of his company's headquarters, their newborn daughter in their arms. "Family is the greatest asset," he used to say back then. But now, with Chloe paralyzed and Rachel buried, all that remained was guilt and the desperation of a father who, trying to protect what was left, had installed hidden cameras all over the house. What he saw in those recordings changed everything. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, from which city, state, or country are you watching this story? I really want to know how far these emotions are reaching. The silence inside that Boston mansion was almost violent. Nathan Cole, one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs on the East Coast, woke up every day with the same question stuck in his chest. How do you keep living after losing everything that really matters? Months earlier, a car accident had taken the life of his wife, Rachel, and left their baby girl, Chloe, paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, the man who once led investor conferences and graced magazine covers could barely get out of bed. Chloe was only 11 months old when it happened. She survived the impact, but lost movement in her legs. Nathan, drowning in guilt, shut himself off from the world. He spent his days locked in his home office, staring at old photos like he could drag time backward just by looking hard enough. He had more than enough money to pay for the best nurses and caretakers, but none of them stayed more than 2 weeks. The grief inside that house was too heavy even for people who were paid to be there. Nathan didn't trust anyone. The sharp watchfulness in his eyes and the rigid protocols he imposed on every new employee made it clear. Grief had carved deep scars into him, not only because of what he'd lost, but because of how deeply he believed he'd failed as a husband and as a father. The more he looked at Chloe, the more his heart tightened. Her presence was a daily reminder of everything that had slipped through his fingers. But something unexpected was about to cross that threshold. It wasn't coming from a medical center or some cutting-edge piece of technology. It was coming from something much simpler, much more human, and far more powerful than Nathan could ever have imagined. After so many failed attempts, Nathan had almost given up on hiring someone new. But one rainy afternoon, the intercom buzzed, and the guard's calm voice announced, "The new housekeeper is here." Her name was Lily Morgan, a young woman from a small town in rural North Carolina. When she walked in, she carried herself with a quiet posture, soft eyes, and hands that looked like they'd carried more weight than her age should allow. And yet, they held everything with gentleness. Nathan simply pointed to the upstairs hallway, hardly managing a full sentence. At first, Lily spoke very little. She moved through the house without making noise, like someone who understood the grief carved into every wall. But there was something about her that you couldn't ignore. A calm presence, almost comforting, as if the atmosphere itself got lighter when she walked through a room. Whenever she passed the bedroom where Chloe slept, Lily stopped for a few seconds. It was like she saw past the paralysis and the sadness and spoke to the child beneath all that silence. It happened on an ordinary morning, the kind that gave no warning that anything would be different. Nathan was in his office, buried in paperwork he wasn't really reading, when he heard a sharp little laugh. He froze. Silence. Then the laugh again. He walked out of the office almost without breathing, stepped down the stairs, turned the corner, and stopped cold. For the first time since the accident, Chloe was smiling. smiling for real, eyes bright, tiny arms reaching out toward the new housekeeper. Nathan didn't know how to react. He just stood there watching a scene that felt impossible. He didn't ask questions, he only observed. And in that exact moment, something inside him moved too. A spark, a flicker, an uncomfortable kind of hope. He still didn't really know who Lily Morgan was. But he knew one thing for sure. With a simple gesture, she had shattered a silence he thought would last forever. Nathan was never the kind of man who left things to chance. He'd built his entire empire by controlling every detail, every risk, every variable inside his own house. After the tragedy, that instinct grew even stronger. So even though he was amazed by the effect Lily had on Chloe, he couldn't bring himself to trust her completely. Quietly, he had tiny cameras installed in the most important rooms of the mansion. "It's for my daughter's safety," he kept telling himself, like someone who tries to justify the weight of a mistake before even making it. The first few days of footage showed what he already knew. Lily was careful, respectful, almost invisible. But over time, those images revealed something far beyond his expectations. Nathan started noticing details he never would have seen with the naked eye. Lily didn't just clean the house, she spent hours with Chloe, guiding her through specific, gentle movements, stimulating the child's arms and legs with a kind of technical care. And it wasn't just that. She talked to Chloe, even when she got no response back, like someone who knew exactly how much each word matters. Intrigued, Nathan started researching the movements he was watching on the screen. He discovered that many of Lily's gestures weren't random at all. They were real neuromotor physical therapy exercises, specific techniques used to help recovery in cases like Chloe's. That's when something hit him hard. Lily wasn't just a kind housekeeper. There was a whole invisible background there, a story she hadn't told, a truth that showed up in every touch and every glance. Distrust slowly gave way to something else, admiration. For the first time in a long time, he looked at someone and saw more than a job title or a task. He saw humanity, but there was a problem, and it wasn't small. Lily had no idea she was being watched. And that detail, just one small piece of plastic and a blinking red light, carried inside it the seed of a brand new disaster. It was during a casual moment near the edge of the garden that Nathan asked the question, "Have you ever worked with kids before?" Lily hesitated. The answer took a moment to come. After a few seconds of silence, she shifted her eyes away and replied softly, "With my brother." Nathan didn't push. Then, but her eyes said much more than the words she'd allowed out. There was a whole life behind that short sentence. Later that day, while Chloe napped, Lily sat on the back porch with Nathan for the very first time. The sky was painted a soft orange, and the sound of leaves moving in the wind filled the quiet. That's where she told him her story. Her parents had died in an accident while she was still in college. Studying physical therapy, Lily had dropped out to care for her little brother, Noah, who had been born with severe cerebral palsy. She was only 20 when she suddenly became mother, sister, nurse, and improvised therapist all at once. Those 3 years were intense. Endless hospital visits, sleepless nights, and stimulation sessions she pieced together from instinct, videos, and everything she could absorb from doctors. Noah passed away at 3 years old in her arms during a respiratory crisis. After that, Lily closed herself off. She tried going back to school, but couldn't enter a classroom without feeling suffocated by memories. Working as a housekeeper was her way of staying in motion without having to face, head-on, a pain that was still raw. When she saw Chloe for the first time, something in her recognized that pain, not just the child's pain, but Nathan's too. It wasn't pity, it was identification. She knew what it was to carry a small, fragile body and know the world outside had no guarantees to offer. Getting close to Chloe wasn't an act of charity, it was an act of love. From someone still in pieces, but who still knew how to care. In telling her story, Lily didn't just reveal who she was. She showed why she had so much to offer. Nathan listened in silence, and something in his expression changed. For the first time, he saw Lily not as an employee, but as someone who understood wounds he didn't even know how to name. Days went by, and the routine in the house started to change in ways that were almost unnoticeable at first mornings. That used to be heavy and apathetic now carried the soft sound of songs Lily hummed while doing little exercises with Chloe. Sometimes the baby smiled just from hearing her voice. Other times she was still, but her eyes stayed locked on that woman who seemed to know every inch of her body, every limit, every sign of pain or comfort. Nathan watched all of it from a distance, still afraid of getting too involved, but it was impossible not to see the transformation happening right in front of him. In a short time, Chloe started responding more. She learned to communicate with her hands and face, to sit with support, to move her fingers and arms with more strength. Tiny advances that might seem simple for another child, but for her, they were miracles. Nathan, who had once approached his daughter with the fear of breaking her by accident, now sat on the floor beside them, watching, trying to repeat the movements Lily showed him. For the first time since the accident, father and daughter were truly connected. And the bridge between them had a name, Lily. The house found a new rhythm. Sometimes Nathan cooked, something he hadn't done in years. He spent afternoons in the living room, laptop open, while Lily read children's books out loud to Chloe. And in the middle of this new routine, he started noticing things that had nothing to do with therapy. He noticed the way Lily tied up her hair when she needed to focus, the way her soft laugh slipped out when Chloe made a funny face, the way her hands were strong and gentle at the same time. There was a quiet kind of beauty there, not built on charm or appearances, but on truth, on presence, on humanity. One cold night, Lily arrived later than usual. It was pouring outside, and Nathan rushed to the entrance to help her with the umbrella. She was shivering, hair wet and clinging to her forehead, holding a grocery bag with some fruit for Chloe's breakfast. He looked at her longer than he meant to, and when she smiled, whispering a simple "thank you," something inside him clicked. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic passion. It was a quiet recognition, like he'd finally realized that real love doesn't crash into your life with fireworks. It slips in slowly, in the person who shows up tired, but still thinks about bringing breakfast for a child that isn't even theirs. From that day on, Nathan found himself looking forward to their late afternoon conversations. He searched for excuses to ask more about her past, to share stories from his own younger days. Lily, in turn, also started opening up more. The bond between them grew in the silence, in shared care, in shared grief. Until one afternoon, in the middle of a game on the living room floor, Chloe looked at Lily, pointed her tiny hand, and said for the very first time, "Mama." Nathan froze. Lily burst into tears, and even though someone from the outside might say they misheard it, they both knew exactly what that word meant the little girl had chosen. In that moment, even without vows or rings, the love between the three of them was already sealed. That night, Lily was searching for an extra blanket in the hallway closet when she noticed a tiny red light blinking on the top shelf. Curious, she pulled down a box of linens, and what she found made her blood run cold. A micro camera pointed directly at the spot where she spent hours with Chloe. Confused and shaking, she went into Chloe's room and started looking more carefully. She found another small device hidden among the children's books. The shock hit like a punch. The house that had started to feel like a home had been watching her every move. She didn't scream, she didn't cry right away. She just closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and fought hard not to collapse right there. When Nathan came in from the garage, he found her standing in the middle of the living room, holding one of the tiny cameras in her hand. Her expression wasn't raging anger. It was something much worse, pure, complete disappointment. She didn't need to say a word, he understood everything. The silence between them lasted longer than any argument could have, and maybe that's what hurt the most. Because when someone who trusted you chooses to stay quiet, it's because something broke in a way that's hard to fix. How long? she finally asked, voice steady but wounded. Nathan tried to explain. He talked about protection, about fear, about the trauma of losing someone and never knowing who to trust again. But the more he talked, the emptier his words sounded. Lily listened, but didn't buy it. Not because cameras in themselves are unforgivable, but because he hadn't trusted her enough to tell her. And because that choice, no matter how rational it seemed in his head, put everything they'd built together under suspicion. The love that had begun to grow there was now covered in shadow. The next morning, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Nathan woke up and didn't hear the kettle boiling or the light footsteps in the hallway. Chloe was crying in her crib, confused, waiting for someone who didn't show up. It was Nathan who had to pick her up, still dazed, still lost. For the first time since Lily had arrived, the house went back to feeling heavy and empty. And now Nathan wasn't crying just over what he'd lost in the past. He was grieving the destruction of his present, trying so hard to protect what he loved most. He had ended up breaking the one thing that gave him hope. If this story has already grabbed you by the heart, tell me in the comments, which moment has hit you the hardest so far? Nathan had no idea what to do in those first days. He tried to keep up a routine with Chloe, but nothing worked the way it used to. The house had turned cold and mechanical again. Every room carried the echo of Lily's absence. He stopped eating properly. He barely slept, but what haunted him most was the memory of her face when she stood there holding that camera. It wasn't a simple hurt. It was the look of someone forced once again into a world that had always monitored her, but never truly welcomed her. And he, the man who admired her strength so deeply, had been the one to knock her down again. On the third day, Nathan did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He drove through the city with no destination. He stopped at clinics, community health centers, shelters. He held up a printed image of Lily, taken from an old frame of the camera footage, and asked about her with a shaking voice. Most people said they'd never seen her. At a shelter near Quincy, a staff member looked at the picture a little longer and finally said slowly, "She was here yesterday." Nathan stood there in silence for a few seconds, letting every syllable sink in. His heart began to pound hard in his chest. Without thinking twice, he asked if he could see her. Lily was in the back of the shelter, sitting on a wooden bench, eyes red, head bowed. When she saw him, she shrank a little, like she was bracing for another judgment. Nathan didn't say anything at first. He just walked over, knelt down in front of the bench, his suit rumpled, face tired, but eyes steady, and said, "Please forgive me. I ruined everything because I didn't know how to trust. I learned the lesson too late, I know, but I can't let you walk away thinking you weren't enough. Everything for Chloe. For me." Lily didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled, her jaw tightened. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes and said honestly, "I'm not perfect, Nathan. I came into your house thinking I was there to help heal someone else, and forgot that I'm still in pieces myself." "Then let's pick up those pieces together," he replied without hesitation. One by one, this time with no cameras. Trust. That's when she broke. She cried in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in a long time. He pulled her into his arms, right there on the cold floor of that shelter, holding her like someone who finally understood that forgiveness isn't a word. It's a courageous act. And love sometimes is owning your mistakes before it truly is too late. On the drive back home, Lily held Nathan's hand. They didn't talk much, and they didn't need to. Their tears had already said everything. Chloe slept in her car seat, with a peace on her face that Nathan hadn't seen in days. Slowly, gently, their home was beginning to be rebuilt. And this time, the foundation was different. The first thing Nathan did when they got home was stop in front of the library door, the room where, out of sheer paranoia, he'd had the first camera installed. He didn't give a speech. He just pulled out a small toolbox, opened the built-in cabinet, and exposed the device. Lily watched from a few steps away, still unsure. Nathan removed the camera carefully, set it on the floor, and picked up a hammer. Then, without hesitating, he smashed it right there. The hard crack of shattering plastic echoed through the room like something much bigger than a broken object. It sounded like the end of a cycle of fear. He turned to Lily, breathing hard. "There are more," he said. "Every last one of them is leaving today." She didn't answer, but her eyes filled with tears. Nathan took her hand, and room by room they searched together for the remaining cameras. Above Chloe's door, behind the music room bookshelf, near the stairwell. Each time he found one, he showed it to Lily before destroying it with his own hands. Every swing of that hammer seemed to shake loose another piece of the fear that had been running his life. When they were done, they collapsed on the living room floor, exhausted. Chloe slept on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket. Lily leaned her head on Nathan's shoulder and exhaled, like her body was finally allowed to relax after months of permanent alert. "I almost left for good," she whispered. "And I almost let the best thing that ever happened to me walk out the door," he answered. The silence that followed wasn't tense anymore. It was necessary, like the quiet pause between a painful ending and a brand new beginning. In the days that followed, everything was a relearning process. Nathan started asking Lily before making any decisions about Chloe. They began sharing meals at the same table. Chloe seated between them, Lily put back on the t-shirt she'd left in the guest room closet. A small detail Nathan noticed with a deep, quiet joy. Trust didn't go back to what it had been. It came back better, more mature, more cautious, more real. Now everything was out in the open. No more hidden lenses, just attentive eyes, sincere presence, and the kind of love you build out of ruins. One Saturday morning, while they were organizing the bookshelves, Chloe pointed at an empty space on one of the shelves and asked, "Where's the little light box?" That's what she used to call the camera that blinked from time to time. Nathan smiled and replied, "We threw it away, baby. Now there's only real light here, the kind that comes from people." Lily's eyes filled again, but this time with something close to peace. Chloe didn't fully understand the words, but the energy in that moment told the real story. For the first time, this house didn't just look like a home. It felt like one. Time moved differently inside that house. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't that numb kind of routine from before. It felt like a slow reconstruction, where every little gesture carried a new layer of meaning. Chloe, now a little over a year old, kept making steady progress. The exercises Lily used, patient, technical, loving, were no longer just an attempt to soften the impact of paralysis. They'd become a real path to recovery. What had once felt impossible was slowly turning into concrete hope. The first big sign came on a cloudy afternoon. Chloe was on the living room rug, playing with her colorful blocks when she tried to change positions on her own. Nathan and Lily were in the kitchen when they heard a strange little sound, something halfway between effort and victory. They ran in and saw it. Chloe was on her knees, arms planted on the rug, trying to push herself forward, wobbly, unstable but determined. Tears flooded Nathan's eyes. Lily dropped to the floor beside the little girl and held her by the waist. "That's it, sweetheart. Go at your own pace. Right here." The next week, Chloe was crawling. Soon after, she began pulling herself up with support. Every milestone felt like the birth of a whole new world. And there was something beautiful about the way they celebrated. The three of them together, without big displays, eyes shining, hearts full. The man who used to measure everything in terms of deadlines, contracts, and returns on investment now broke down over one unsteady step from his daughter. He had finally learned what wealth really means, and it had nothing to do with numbers. Inspired by Chloe's progress, Lily made a decision. On a Monday night, she called Nathan out onto the porch and handed him her reactivated college enrollment form for physical therapy. "I'm ready," she said. "But only because you two reminded me I'm allowed to dream again." Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. It was the rental contract for a small office space downtown. "There's room for a clinic there," he said, "and it already has a name on the door, Gabriel Therapy Center. I only paid for the space, the rest is yours." Lily broke down, clutching the envelope to her chest with her eyes closed. It wasn't about the room or the paperwork. It was about the chance to write a new chapter, one where her pain wouldn't be erased, but transformed. The three of them, Chloe, Lily, and Nathan, had become something they still didn't quite know how to label. Not yet a family on paper, but absolutely a family where it counts. Over time came the longer hugs, the more frequent kisses, the shared plans for the future. The home that once held only silence now had children's drawings on the fridge, toys scattered down the hallway, and the smell of homemade bread on Sunday mornings. It wasn't perfect. It was real, and it was the miracle no one saw coming. The living room was decorated with pink balloons and soft string lights hanging from the beams. It was Chloe's second birthday, and for the first time, Nathan had opened up the house for guests. Close friends, discreet neighbors, some of Lily's old classmates, nothing flashy but everything warm. On the table, there were simple desserts, a homemade apple pie in the center, and a playlist mixing children's songs with some of Rachel's favorite tracks. A subtle touch of nostalgia, not to wound, but to remember with tenderness. Everyone was there for Chloe, but deep down they knew the celebration was about more than the birth of a child. It was about a story of rebirth. When Lily brought Chloe to the middle of the room, guiding her along a small balance bar, the noise faded. The little girl wore brand new shoes, a floral dress, and eyes that practically glowed. She looked around slowly, searched for her father's gaze, then for Lily's. With a shy little smile, she took her very first step on her own. The reaction was instant. Pause, shouts, tears. Nathan covered his mouth with both hands, stunned. Lily dropped to her knees, arms open wide, and Chloe, wobbling, took 2 more steps and fell into her embrace. It wasn't just a physical milestone. It was a symbol of everything that little girl and that family had overcome. The floor that had once felt cold and empty was now the stage for a miracle. Right then and there, Nathan knew exactly what he wanted to do in front of everyone. He pulled a small box from his pocket, dropped to one knee, and took a deep breath. "Lily Morgan," he began, voice shaking. "You didn't come into our lives to replace anyone. You came to become who you were always meant to be, the heart of our home. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I know one thing. I don't want to live a single day without you by my side." Lily brought her hands to her mouth. The tears ran freely now, but her smile was light, like someone who had finally found a place to rest. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. Months later, the house was even fuller. Not just with new furniture or more toys, but with life. Lily finished her first semester back at college with top grades, and Gabriel Therapy Center was quickly becoming a reference point for pediatric rehabilitation. Chloe, now running in the backyard, counted the days until her little brother arrived. Lily was pregnant. What started in devastation and loss now bloomed into love and building something new. The man who once hid cameras out of fear now knelt on the floor to play with his daughter. The woman who carried old guilt now helped other children push beyond their limits. And the little girl who was born in the middle of tragedy now ran, laughed, and inspired everyone around her with a strength no one had taught her, because it had always been there. The home once filled with silence and guilt was now a real house, smelling like cake in the oven, going with laughter in the hallway, toys forgotten under the couch, and above all, filled with real people living every second of this new life in truth. Sometimes the biggest transformations don't show up with noise or grand speeches. They slip in quietly, in the wobbly step of a child everyone said would never walk, in a whispered, "I forgive you," between 2 adults learning how to love with more maturity than before. Nathan, Lily, and Chloe didn't become a perfect family. They became a real one. A family made of mistakes, second chances, and the conscious decision to keep loving even when walking away would be easier. The man who once hid behind cameras now gets down on the floor to build block towers that Chloe will knock over in seconds. The woman who carried more grief than she knew what to do with now walks into treatment rooms every day to help children rewrite their own stories. And the baby who came into the world wrapped in pain now runs free, laughs loud, and reminds everyone around her that hope doesn't always show up as a miracle. Sometimes it shows up as persistence. What about you? Have you ever lived a story of starting over like this? If you were in Lily's place, do you think you could forgive? If you were in Nathan's shoes, would you have had the courage to kneel down and admit you were wrong? Share with us in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this story touched you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Ones that don't just entertain, but remind us of the most beautiful part of being human, the ability to rebuild, even when everything seems lost.